So originally this was going to be a video on the connection between Venti and Istaroth. Unsurprisingly, as this is a popular theory, there are lots of videos about them specifically, and though I do think I have thoughts to add to the conversation, as I was researching this topic, I realized that Istaroth herself has some strange inconsistencies, and that it might be better to do a video just on her at first, and then go into her connections with others in Teyvat, including Venti, and perhaps other characters like Dottore. So with all of this being said, let's get into it. The Primordial One is, as far as we can tell, the first descender that came to Teyvat. They were the one to fight the Dragon Sovereigns, ultimately defeating them and paving the way for humanity to exist in Teyvat. To this end, the Primordial One created 4 shades, one of which was Istaroth. We know Istaroth is the god of time, though she goes by many other names and epithets too, depending on the time and location of her worship. In Mondstadt, she was known as the Thousand Winds. The Aranara refer to her as the Undying Wind, while in Inkonomiya she was known as Tokoyo Okami or Kairos. While her names in Inkonomiya have different meanings that I will discuss later, it seems that overall in Teyvat, her epithets indicate that she has something to do with the wind as well as time. We know that Istaroth was active in what I will be referring to as the First Age. This is the age of humans and their prosperity after the Dragon Sovereigns were defeated. This, according to the book of Before the Sun and Moon, was a time where humans had direct connections with the heavens, likely through the Sealies, though that will be a topic for another video. As a quick side note, for those of you who are caught up on the lore, or do all the world quests, or are like me and just watch videos like these, you likely know about the 3 Moon Sisters. They will be getting a video of their own, but they were also likely active during this time frame as well. Istaroth was also active during the war with the Second Who Came, which likely refers to the Second Descender and marks the end of the First Age. This was a war that brought great calamity, and though it is not confirmed, it is thought that this calamity is likely the introduction of forbidden knowledge. Istaroth during this time was the only shade still responding to the prayers of the people, at least in terms of Inkonomiya, and was considered their primary deity until Urabashi took over. Again, there is far more to discuss here, and I likely will in a later video, but we're going to be focusing on Istaroth for the moment. The war with the Second Who Came ended in a stalemate with the Primordial One and the Second Who Came agreeing to work together to bring back prosperity to Teyvat. It is unknown if Istaroth was still fighting, or agreed with this stalemate at the time. Sometime after the end of this war and before the start of the Archon War, a 3rd Descender arrived, and their body was used to create the Gnosis. By this point, it seems as if Teyvat was largely handed over to the gods who fought and became Archons. The Primordial One, and by extension the other shades, as well as the Second Who Came, likely retreated back to Celestia. However, it seems as if Istaroth stayed in Teyvat. She was worshipped alongside Venti in Mondstadt. A believes that she had something to do with the sacred Sakura tree being able to bloom in Inazuma, and the Aranara are at least somewhat aware of her presence, while the rest of the world seem to have largely forgotten about her. This is what we have mostly confirmed up to this point in the story, so now that I've shared the timeline with you, let's get into some of Istaroth's strange inconsistency, as well as some theories that I have about Istaroth herself. Istaroth, or at least what is recorded about her, is a bit vague and up in the air. This isn't exactly something that is unexpected, given the fact that most of this timeline starts well before the Archon War, and references to her in the modern era of Teyvat are limited. It seems as if she has more or less been forgotten by time, as we have to learn about her through books and stories, or in preserved lines of speech in the case of Mondstadt. We know for a fact that she existed before the Second Who Came, and during the war with this being, but eventually she must have left Inkonomiya where her worship was centralized, simply because Urabashi then came and became their new primary god, and I don't think Urabashi could have handled fighting a shade of the Primordial One. However, after Inkonomiya, we have no real records of her exploits anywhere. She might have been around during the time of the civilization previously on Dragonspine, a topic for another video, but that would have been around the same time as Inkonomiya as well, so my point still stands. What we know about Istaroth from Inkonomiya, though, paints her as a benevolent god, one that responded to the people's prayers, until she didn't anymore. Thousands of years must have passed before eventually the Archon War was waged, and apparently after Venti took the seat of the Animo Archon, he and Istaroth ruled side by side in Mondstadt. However, Venti makes no mention of Istaroth himself, and we know that by the time of the aristocracy, Istaroth's worship must have fallen out of favor, as the aristocracy was able to more or less cover up the idea that she was even worshipped at all. What is interesting here, though, is that in order to be such an important figure in Mondstadt, she must have had some long-standing tradition of worship, and yet, besides the world quests and the Thousand Winds Temple, her worship seems to almost be entirely forgotten. Her relationship with Venti will be a discussion for a later video, so let me just get to my point. There is a large amount of time where Istaroth's actions are unaccounted for. Then she seems to suddenly pop up, and just as suddenly disappear. This discrepancy in her timeline doesn't make much sense. Why fight in wars and help the people of Teyvat, only to stand aside for thousands of years, only to then begin to help again? Then there is her potential influence in Inazuma with the omnipresent god statue, and the potential of helping Mikoto plant the sacred Sakura tree. So let's just get into why I think Istaroth has such a strange timeline. And I promise it does not all boil down to she's the god of time. So Istaroth is time.
Bruh.
Okay, I know you guys are probably rolling your eyes, but let me explain. When we meet Dottore in Sumeru, he eventually explains somewhat the process behind the creation of his clones, taking segments of himself at different ages so that he can observe through time, eliminating another variable for his experiments. I'm not necessarily claiming that Istaroth has done the same thing, though that is a theory that I'll be covering another day, but rather that Istaroth exists throughout all of time all at once. This makes sense as her introduction in the book Before the Sun and the Moon reads as follows. She was the moment. She was every moment. She was the measure of 1,000 winds and the sun and the moon. She was every second of joy, every moment of rage, every instance of longing, every minute of obsession. She was every flash of delirium. Istaroth is also known as the God of Moments. Istaroth, I think, exists throughout time in various ways. How exactly she does this will probably be saved for the Venti video, but assuming this is true, I also think that if we consider the idea of an Istaroth Prime, who would have been the one to fight in the First and Second Wars, I think she is significantly weakened, and to preserve her influence in Teyvat, more or less gave up her original physical form and became moments within Teyvat. This might seem like a leap, and I promise I don't mean to keep bringing up Venti, but let's just assume Venti has something to do with Istaroth, either directly or indirectly. In the manga and in the game, we see Venti get uncomfortable with the mention of Celestia. In the manga, we even see 3 hooded figures which seem to be the source of his discomfort, which might be the 3 other shades. I think Istaroth ultimately disagreed with the Primordial One and the Second Who Came in how they were ruling Teyvat, and I think in the war she ended up losing most of her powers. I don't have much evidence for this claim other than Celestia seems to be rather willing to throw away human life. Sending down sky nails to destroy the mortal landscape might seem like a greater good situation. After all, they are trying to stop the spread of forbidden knowledge, but it ruins civilizations full of people who were allowed to die abandoned by their gods. In this same vein, the people of Enconomia prayed to the Primordial One and the Shades for help, but only Istaroth answered. We also know that the Primordial One blocked the people of Enconomia from reaching the surface once more, as well as destroying Dragonspine like I previously mentioned. I think Istaroth became disillusioned with Celestia, because the Primordial One broke the covenant it had made with the people of Teyvat. Or perhaps more accurately, I believe Istaroth found out what the sacred plan for humans on Teyvat was, and she disagreed with it. Istaroth was a mere shade, and she wouldn't have the power to defeat both her creator and the Second Who Came. So instead, I believe she divided herself and allowed the seeds of her power to be spread throughout time, so that they may sprout at the best times. After all, at the Thousand Winds Temple, we see the line, "Seeds of stories, brought by the wind and cultivated by time." This is something I more find just interesting and wanted to put it here. I think this would have to be a topic for a video later, likely on Enconomia, But the name Istaroth is most referred to in Enkonomiya is Tokoyo Okami. Okami means great god, but Tokoyo means the eternal world, and in Shintoism it usually refers to the other world or the land of the dead, though it also might be accurate to describe it similarly to places like Avalon, places in other worlds with eternal youth. Either way, Istaroth is essentially worshipped as the great god of the eternal world. This eternal world could be a reference to Celestia, but I also have some theories about other places it might be, but I'll likely have to save that for a later video. Either way, I just wanted to mention it now as I think it's an interesting twist on Istaroth's character. Whether Istaroth is a power for good or evil remains to be seen, but I think she is aware in some way or another, perhaps lost in many moments and at the same time present in all of them. I also think she has some relationships with other characters, and I know, again, lots of people have done videos on her relationship with Venti, and again, I do think I have more interesting thoughts to contribute on this, but I'm gonna keep that for another video. I also think perhaps the God of Time has more of a connection with Dottore than we give credit for. If any of these video topics sound interesting to you, then go ahead and like and subscribe so you'll catch my new ones. My goal is to post at least one video a week on this channel. For now, that is all. May the wind bless your travels.